Geneva, good afternoon to those of you who are joining us from Bangladesh and the region. This has been an exceptionally important endeavor. On 14 August last year, Dr. Mohammed Yunus, the chief advisor of the interim government of Bangladesh, asked me to deploy a team to conduct an independent and impartial fact-finding into the human rights violations and abuses that took place between 1 July and 15 August of last year. I want to emphasize the importance of that invitation by Dr. Yunus. My team received overall good cooperation from the authorities, access to current and former senior officials, and we also had access to a lot of important official information. I would also like to express my deep gratitude to the many victims and their families, survivors, witnesses, medical professionals and other experts, national and international civil society organizations who engaged with and assisted our team. Among our key findings, there are reasonable grounds to believe that officials of the former government, its security and intelligence apparatus, together with violent elements associated with the former ruling party, committed serious and systematic human rights violations. These include hundreds of extrajudicial killings, extensive arbitrary arrest and detention, and torture and ill treatment, including of children, as well as gender-based violence. These violations were carried out with the knowledge, coordination, and direction of the former political leadership and senior security officials, with the specific goal of suppressing the protests and keep the former government's grip on power. Women and girls were at the forefront of the early protests, and our report details they were specifically subjected to gender-based violence by security forces and Awami League supporters. There are reasonable grounds to believe that certain crimes against humanity have been committed, directed against protesters and their supporters. We also documented serious acts of revenge that private individuals committed against supporters of the former ruling party, police officers, and in some cases people belonging to minority and distinct religious groups in the immediate aftermath of the protests. Efforts to ensure accountability have begun, with many cases being lodged, including before Bangladesh's domestic International Crimes Tribunal. There are major challenges and deficiencies in the current legal system, and significant steps need to be undertaken to ensure compliance with international standards of due process and fair trial. My office is available to advise and support the government in addressing these issues. There are also accountability avenues at the international level that can be considered, such as universal jurisdiction, as well as a referral by Bangladesh of this situation to the International Criminal Court. For violations of this gravity and magnitude, however, much more will need to be done than criminal trials. What is needed is a comprehensive process of truth-telling, reparation, memorialization and reform as the path to national healing, and my hope is that this report will contribute to that. Thousands of people, including children, have suffered life-altering injuries. Resources will be needed to implement victim-centered reparation programs and provide compensation, long-term medical treatment, rehabilitation care, and livelihood opportunities for victims. It is just as important that Bangladesh institutes profound reforms so that such serious violations will never occur again, and that the repressive laws and institutions underpinning them are dismantled or completely overhauled. When I visited Bangladesh last October, I was deeply moved by my meetings with student leaders, with civil society actors and officials who were working hard to build on the momentum to implement a new vision for Bangladesh. One with human rights and social justice at its core. The recommendations in this report are made in the spirit of contributing to the implementation of such a vision. And my office is available to continue and further expand our cooperation with Bangladesh, including through a strengthened presence in the country. In recent decades, Bangladesh's promise has too often been marred by bitter feuding and patronage and identity politics. Today, this transition offers a chance to step back from cycles of revenge and move towards a new approach that brings the nation together in a spirit of trust building and healing. Advancing accountability and human rights will be fundamental to achieving that transformation and change. Thank you.
Thank you, High Commissioner. We will now take questions. I'd like to invite the Bangladeshi journalists who are online. If you raise your hands, then we can take questions from you. I don't see any raised at this stage well, actually we do. We've got one hand. I'd rather we take 3 questions at a time. Maybe we might. Actually, we'll take the first question online from Jamuna TV. If you could please identify yourself. Then we now actually have a second question from Mehdi Hassan. So if we do those first 2 questions, please.
Excellency, thank you. My name is Mahfouz Mishu. I work for Jamuna TV. It's a 24/7 news channel based in Dhaka. My question is to High Commissioner. My question is about the legal process. You know, you have identified the problems, and ex-Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina and her then Home Minister Asaduzzaman Khan Kamal as one of the planner, and they were directed to the law enforcing agency to killing these 1,400 people. So both of them are out of country. So will you be able to help Bangladesh government to bring back them in Bangladesh and face them the judicial process?
Thank you. And the next question from Mahedi.
Hello, this is Mehdi Hassan Maruf. I am with the Netro News. According to the UN fact-finding report, Naidi Islam, now an advisor in the interim government, he was abducted and taken to DGFI, the military intelligence, their Ainagar detention center on the 19th July last year. Would you please elaborate on the details of this abduction? Thank you.
Thank you. And then we'll take one more online from the Bangladeshi media. Israt from DBC News. Israt from DBC News. Okay, maybe we're having I think he's online. Israt? Okay, we might move on to the next one. I think he might be having some comms problems. So this one is from Kamaruzam.
Yes.
Kamaruzam, if you could
Yes.
identify the news organisation you work for, please.
Yes, I'm Kamaruzzaman. I'm working for TRT World, Bangladesh correspondent, Turkish television channel. Actually, you know that Sheikh Hasina, along with other top cabinet members, most of them are now in India, and Bangladesh is conducting the judicial process against the human rights violation and genocide charges, especially during the July student movement. But India, Sheikh Hasina was the #1 ally of India according to media statement and assessment, and now India is very rigid not to return Sheikh Hasina or other high officials. So do you think that in this situation, without the cooperation of India, the fair judicial process can be conducted by Bangladesh?
Thank you. Over to you, High Commissioner.
Well, thank you very much. I think when it comes to the first question, it is important, and that is really goes to the heart of what the report is talking about. It is about accountability. When serious, grave violations of international human rights law, of abuses of this kind are being committed, as this report documents, it is crucial that indeed accountability is served. It's also a response to the survivors and the victims and the people that my office was able to interview on the ground. We have a domestic system, and that domestic system is in need of reform. And that's what is happening as we speak. And I had a chance when I was in Bangladesh to discuss this both with the interim government but also with the different heads of the reform process that were being undertaken. And indeed, we need to ensure that there is fair trial standards, there's due process guarantees, and this reform is ongoing and is one that we need to support as much as we can from the international community side as well. There is also the issue of making sure that when people, for example, who have committed serious crimes are outside the country, a universal jurisdiction can work. In those countries where universal jurisdiction for grave violations of international human rights law is possible, then that can also be a part of the accountability process. And then, of course, as I mentioned, the possibility of a referral by Bangladesh to the International Criminal Court, because Bangladesh is a state party to the Rome Statute. Now, this is one thing. The other thing is truth-telling. My report directly contributes to that because it establishes the fact it's done by an independent, we don't have any stakes in the matter. What my team has done on the ground is precisely to establish the facts, to look at what happened, to interview, to look at an enormous amount of material, and to bring forward these facts and the application of the law. And that is in and of itself important because it is part of the truth-telling process. But beyond that, we also need memorialization. We need a deep healing for those who are directly affected, but for the country as a whole. And I just hope that the current reform process of the government, of the interim government, is an important contribution to this, because we hope that this new vision of Bangladesh can be given birth to, and with human rights at the center of it. On the second, there was a particular case mentioned, Nahid Islam. In fact, we have documented this case. If you read the report, we have this case documented as one of the emblematic cases of arbitrary detention, of which, as you know, there were many findings in that regard. And again, we can learn from it, and we have indeed made sure that these cases, the way that they are documented, provide the type of response that everyone expects. Look, on as I mentioned before, on the judicial process, it is important again that the judicial process inside the country is reformed, that it guarantees due process, that it guarantees fair trials, and that process goes ahead, because we cannot allow for perpetrators of serious human rights violations to get away with impunity. They need to be held to account, and that's part indeed of the work that is being undertaken. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, we'll take a couple of questions in the room to start with. First, AFP.
Yeah, thank you. Nina Larson, AFP. So I was wondering I had a couple of small questions. I was wondering if you could say what your report found in terms of Sheikh Hasina's direct responsibility. If you're calling for international justice in this matter, I know you said it's impossible. It's important that there is the possibility, but do you think it's that it would be good that this does go to universal jurisdiction or to other forms of international justice? And finally, sorry, on the reforms that you're talking about, are you concerned that the abuses that you've found in your report are continuing due to, I guess, embedded problems in the system? There was a report out today about 12 people who have died since the end of the revolution in custody. So I was just wondering if you had some comments on that. Thank you.
We'll take another question in the room. Thanks.
Yeah, Laurent Siro, Swiss News Agency. Thanks, High Commissioner. Follow up on the last question. There's been in the last days a wave of arrests, more than 1,300 arrests. You mentioned that there is a need to set back of the cycle of revenge, so your comments on that. And then on your call for truth-telling, what's the first reaction of the new government? Are they heading towards a format like a truth commission? Thank you.
Thank you. If we have no more questions in the room, I think we'll take one more online from Shahidul Islam. Sorry, I'll come to you next. Shahidul?
Yes, it is Shahidul Islam Chaudhry from OHCHR Patrika in Bangladesh. The Commissioner has mentioned about the ICT process in Bangladesh. At the same time, the international avenues for ensuring justice through ICC. Should Bangladesh complete first the ICT process at home before going to the ICC process for international trial? Thank you.
And we'll take one more question. We've got one in the room, and this will have to be the last one for the High Commissioner. Thank you.
Hi there, Olivia from Reuters. Thank you very much for this briefing. Could you just give a couple of examples, just to add a bit of detail about the types of things that you found in your report in terms of these human rights violations? You gave some helpful broad details, but a couple of examples of some of the worst examples would be helpful. Thank you.
So just on the first question, I think it's clear when you read the report that my office's findings found reasonable grounds to believe that indeed the top echelons of the previous government were aware and in fact were involved in the commission of very serious violations of for instance, enforced disappearances, arbitrary detention, the suppression of the protests through violence. And what it means as well is, these are findings, and there's a certain standard that we use when it comes to human rights inquiries. It's quite another standard when it comes to trial, and that's a different standard that needs to be applied, and that's why we are saying if it leads to trials, further, obviously, criminal investigations are required and warranted, because human rights inquiries do not in and of itself establish criminal guilt. This is indeed for a court of law to decide, but it gives a very strong indication where our findings have gone. The reform process, it's, as always, in a transition, fragile. It's not easy. I saw this myself when I went last year to visit Bangladesh. But I was impressed by the thoroughness, by the seriousness, and by the commitment of the interim government and the chief advisor, but also by the people who are leading these reform processes, how deep they want to go into making sure that some of the systemic structural changes, that they are overcome. Is it easy? No, it's not. It's a complex process, that's clear. And the commitments from the government, even recent announcement by the chief advisor, for example, were also very clear about not repeating the patterns of the past, these revenge killings, the identity politics, the patronage, and these cycles of revenge. And And that is a very strong commitment. Do things happen that shouldn't happen? Yes, they do. And as a result, they need to be investigated. My office only looked at a very specific time frame, which was July, mid-August, so it was already when the new interim government took office. It is important that we learn, that the country learns from this. Our contribution is precisely to offer these facts, but it is also important that each and every incident that happened ever since is properly investigated. And again, my office can provide an independent source of information because we have no stakes in the matter. And that's the advantage of independent human rights inquiries and also help build up a system, a domestic system, a national human rights institution that is fully independent. All the disappearances commission that is also being established, that is part of human rights work that can overcome the past and can ensure that we don't fall back, that a country doesn't fall, or a society doesn't fall back into old cycles of trauma and revenge and violence. So the truth-telling process that's why the truth-telling process is so important, and the truth-telling process is for everyone. It's for each and every part, every segment of the society. As you could see also in the report, we wanted to point the direction, building also on experiences from other countries, that indeed you need to embrace the truth and you need to embrace the facts, and you deal with it through the application of the law. When it comes to the referral, the possible referral, since Bangladesh is a state party to the Rome Statute, again, one of the principles of that is complementariness. And you will have seen this in the whole working of the International Criminal Court. It's when you are indeed faced with a situation that some cases are either so difficult to prosecute and to handle, it's better to refer it to the International Criminal Court. That's a consideration for the government of Bangladesh. And it also shows the value of the international criminal justice system. And let's not forget that it has come under assault in recent weeks, and it is important to show how important that international criminal justice system is for the world. For countries that are particularly affected, such as what we are discussing here, but we have had similar discussions. We had a special session on the Democratic Republic of Congo last week, where again similar considerations apply. But it shows the value of the international criminal justice system. So the complementarity is critical. Look at the findings. It's a very brutal read, and you have seen some of the worst examples. Obviously, the killings. 78% of the 1,400 people who we know have been killed, there may be more, was by firing military rifles, shotguns with pellets. You have seen in the report we have made a very strong plea that shotguns with pellets are forbidden because the injuries that they produce are horrific. And I saw that myself. I went to one of the hospitals in Bangladesh when I visited, and I could talk to some of the survivors, and some of them will be disabled for their lives. And that's especially young people. Some of them were children that I saw. Some of them were young women, young men, and these type of injuries are horrific. And we know that about 12 to 13% of children were affected by this. We had also journalists being killed, at least 6 from what I hear from the report, more than 200 injured. Mass arrests, the climate of fear that you may disappear, that you may not be found again, is extremely traumatic. And that was part of the repressive measures that applied. And again, this tells us the story that we have to bring these situations to light, and we need to put the spotlight on them, especially when we are able to establish the facts, and we need to learn from them, not just for the situation in Bangladesh, but for many other situations around the world where similar systems of repression are working. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, High Commissioner.
I can come in on one of the last questions.
Yes, Ravina Shamdasani, now our spokesperson, and Rory Mungoven, the head of our Asia Pacific section, will continue taking your questions. So Ravina now has a response to one of the questions as well.
Thank you. Good morning and good afternoon. One of the questions was about some of the worst examples, and the High Commissioner, of course, painted a picture of just the scale of the brutality that occurred. The report is unfortunately full of individual examples of the brutality that people were subjected to. Among one of the most harrowing testimonies was that of a young woman in Jatrabari who was holding a wounded protester when a police officer executed him at point-blank range. When she screamed in horror, the officer turned his shotgun on her and fired again, causing severe injuries. And in another case, the security forces shot a young boy in his hand with a shotgun from point-blank range to punish him for throwing stones, and this completely mangled the young boy's hand.
Thank you, Ravina. So we'll go back online. We have a couple of more questions pending. So Israt from DBC, I see you've raised your hand again. Let's see if we can get it working this time. Israt, I see you're unmuted. Okay, maybe there is a problem your end on that. So we have we'll take another two questions. So we have a question from Salahuddin Ahmed, and then a question from Mustafa Yusuf.
Thank you for giving me the floor to talk about. Just I would like to know about police reform and governance issues from Bangladesh. And since the enacted, the Police Act of 1861 during British rule, multiple attempts have been made to reform Bangladesh policing system. Given that the police ordinance of 2007 was drafted but never enacted yet, should the interim government prioritize implementing it for meaningful police reform? Do you think so? If it is, please let me know your insights, please.
Thank you. And then the next question. Mustafa?
Hello, everybody. I'm Mustafa Yusuf. I work for the Banner News. It's a US government-funded news portal focusing on South Asia. My question is, could you be specific about the challenges the interim government might face to prosecute the perpetrators of July uprising, of July massacre? Thanks.
Sorry, the line was a bit muffled. Could you repeat the question?
Sure. Could you be specific about the challenges the interim government might face to prosecute the perpetrators of the July massacre? Thank you.
I'll pass over to Rory Mungoven, the head of the Asia Pacific section.
Thank you very much for the questions. And first on the police reform, which is really a key piece to this moving forward. And not just police reform, but reform to the security sector as a whole, because in Bangladesh, of course, one of the problems has been the militarization of policing and the addition of different forces, Rapid Action Battalion, Border Guards, ANSAR, other forces operating under military command or under the direction of the Prime Minister and senior executive. So this breakdown of independent policing, politicization of policing, has really been one of the significant root causes identified in our report. We really recommend a reform, very far-reaching overhaul of the whole security sector. There needs to be a change of approach in managing public order, not relying on these old colonial powers and emphasising less lethal forms of policing that de-escalate situations rather than lead to these confrontations. As High Commissioner said, there needs to be a prohibition on the use of shotguns with pellets and military weapons in policing public order. The policing system needs to be demilitarised. We recommend the disbandment of the Rapid Action Battalion, which has been responsible for violations not only during this period, but for many years in Bangladesh. And looking ahead, the establishment of a National Police Commission and independent bodies that could ensure accountability over the police, the border guards and other forces. We're very pleased that the government has appointed a reform commission on police, and we have seen that many of the recommendations that we are making align with what is coming through the Reform Commission. So we hope that this is one area where there can be substantial change, substantial progress. On the challenges to prosecuting people, I think we know that while the government has changed with the appointment of the interim government, the system has not necessarily changed, and many officials and people who had served or been appointed under the previous regime continue to function and often be needed across the different ministries. And this, of course, creates a kind of a potential conflict of interest, of obstruction to the reforms or to the accountability process moving forward. When you have a police force that's not yet reformed, responsible for investigating violations committed by police, obviously you have a major challenge. When you look at the courts, of course, the politicisation extended into the judiciary, many judicial appointments. The former government had compromised the independence of the judiciary. And the capacities of the key elements needed for accountability process. Of course, Bangladesh is significant, has its own international crimes tribunal, but of course the investigator prosecution capacity in the court, remains quite limited. We had an enormous challenge as an office to undertake this fact-finding over several months. We know the challenge that they are also facing as investigators in trying to pursue these cases. So I think there are many, institutional and capacity challenges for the justice sector in moving forward. As High Commissioner said, the office is really ready to support in this. And of course, Bangladesh can also look outwards to some of these other possibilities of international support from the International Criminal Court.
Actually, if I can just supplement what Rory has said, concerns do remain. That is clear, as the High Commissioner pointed out, and as Rory pointed out, transitions are fragile, and there are still a lot of concerns about the current situation in Bangladesh, particularly with regard to due process and fair trial in the many cases that have been filed, custodial deaths in the unreformed prison system, actions taken against journalists, and persistent incidents as well of mob violence, including attacks on minorities. In terms of recommendations, the report contains a very comprehensive set of recommendations on institutional reform, law reform. One key recommendation is to take urgent measures to establish a victim and witness protection program that is independent of the existing security forces, and to initiate strict disciplinary measures and criminal investigations in cases of witness intimidation, because this is something we have witnessed quite a lot in Bangladesh.
Thank you, Ravina. We've actually got a question online. It's from Boris Engelson. He says, Bangladesh has been the place of a rampant civil war for more than half a century. What did or could so far the UN do to monitor the risks thereof and try to avoid this second or third or fourth bloodshed since the early 70s? And then we have two other questions on the line. If we could go first to Zima Islam and then M.A.K. Zilani.
Thank you so much. This is Zaima, and I work at the Daily Star. So my question is, did this very comprehensive investigation identify some of the perpetrators by name, and would the Commission be sharing some of these names with the judicial processes in Bangladesh as they try to bring the perpetrators to book, specifically seeing that Bangladesh still has the death penalty?
M.A.K. Zilani? I see you're still muted.
Thank you. Thank you. This is M.A.K. Zilani from Bangladesh, working for the Daily Shomoy Alo. My question is, what is the root causes of incident that occurred on July-August? And what type of instrument, basically military instrument, are used in that incident? And have any sniper uses or like this type? Please, what is your findings? Thank you.
Thank you. Rory?
Thank you very much. Just the first question. I mean, we wouldn't characterise the situation in Bangladesh as having been in civil war, but I think perhaps what you're reflecting is that Bangladesh has been caught in this trap of very binary politics, a kind of winner-takes-all politics that has really led to a very deep polarisation in the country and the capture of state institutions by government in power and the weaponisation of the law and the state, often against the people. That has in turn also kind of created an enabling environment for corruption and the co-option of the economy for private interests and patronage. So I think all of these elements come together and have held the country hostage in many ways over many years. And I think as the High Commissioner said, but more importantly as the students have said, as Chief Advisor has said, this is an opportunity, historic opportunity, to break that cycle. And to break that cycle, to change the form of politics, governance, economy in Bangladesh, really requires this comprehensive acknowledgement of the past, reform of laws and institutions and of the system of governance, recreation of a civil society and civic space, but also democracy, even democracy within parties, to really cultivate a new democracy in Bangladesh. And I think this is a moment, historic moment, that the students have brought for the country. And I think the High Commissioner is, offering our full support to realising that vision. The report doesn't identify perpetrators as such. I mean, of course, there are senior officials named in the report, different moments, different meetings. As High Commissioner said, this is a human rights investigation, not an individual criminal investigation. Of course, we have retained huge amount of material and evidence from this work. It's being very carefully archived and kept according to the highest standards so that it could be used in a future accountability process. And yes, on your question about cooperating with judicial processes going forward, this really depends on two or three things. One, of course, the consent of victims and of the people who've given us information to share that information, their protection, that it's safe to do so, that they won't face some reprisal. Secondly, that the process must be credible, fair, must meet the international standards of fair trial. And thirdly, as you rightly said, the issue of the death penalty is a problem for us. We oppose the death penalty in all circumstances, and as a UN policy, we're constrained from cooperating with processes, with trials that can result in the death penalty. So this is a constraint. The interim government is aware of that. We hope that this whole process will lead to some reflection, debate, reconsideration of the death penalty in Bangladesh, which we think is actually a part of this cycle of revenge. And root causes, look, so many issues identified in the report. I mean, of course, the protests themselves came out of this student protest over the reintroduction of a quota system of employment for government jobs that favoured families and descendants of the ruling party. But it reflected much broader grievances that had become very pent up in the society over a long time. And I think these relate back to some of the things I said about the nature of politics, the high levels of corruption at high level, but also at a day-to-day level, the lack of opportunity of employment, jobs. This is a country that's moving towards middle income. You have a fantastic young generation coming through universities with all sorts of new skills, and without necessarily the opportunities for employment. The suffocation of a lot of small, medium enterprise by this whole oligarchic approach to the economy, and also I think the fact that these restrictive laws, the controls on social media, the suppression of independent journalism, all of this had built up really, I think, to a point of explosion. I think when we visited Bangladesh, even in 2022 with the former High Commissioner, Michelle Bachelet, you could feel this tension building in the society. Of course, the elections in January of 2024 were very polarised and took place in an environment of suppression. And so I think all of these ingredients really were the fuel to which the student protest sort of ignited. And I think this is signified as well in how after the 17th, 18th of July, the protest broadened from the students to a much more mass movement that was reflective really of all sectors of the society and all of the different socioeconomic groups. In terms of weapons, we have quite a bit of information in the report, and I encourage you to look at it closely. And High Commissioner gave you a few of the statistics there, which were striking. 78% of the fatalities were caused by firing, and of that, 66% were caused by military rifles and 12% by shotguns with pellets. So that's about, close to 80%. And the things we find, you'll see in the research, is not only the weapons that were used, but how they were used. So this pattern of, for instance, firing obviously indiscriminately into crowds, but also firing above the torso, and often at angles that were designed to hit the protesters rather than to disperse the protesters. And of course, as Ravina mentioned, there's some horrible examples as well of protesters or bystanders being killed, at very, very short range with very high-powered weapons. So I think you will see there, this prevalence use of military grade weaponry was a key factor in the high level of fatalities that were recorded.
Ravina, something?
I'll just add to that. The question on root causes was, of course, very important, a key question. And in fact, this was part of what the interim government mandated our office to look into specifically on the root causes that led to these terrible incidents in July and August. The report is very long and detailed. It contains a lot of rich, in-depth information about this. And if you go to page 69, you'll see, that the root causes set out in a very systematic manner. And what you will find is, of course, that the root causes run deep. So the reform that needs to take place will also need to be profound.
Thank you. We've got two more questions online, and then we're nearly hit the hour mark on the press conference. So I think these will be our final two questions. So we'll start with Mustafizir, followed by Takuya. Mustafizir. I see you're still muted.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. Yeah, this is Mustafiz from New Age. I'd like to know how could the UN system help Bangladesh government, at present the interim government, to bring back those who held key positions during the July massacre, including the Prime Minister, and many of them at the time fled to other countries and taking shelter there, including India. How could the UN system help Bangladesh to bring back those? And do you think UN position on death sentence could stand as a barrier to getting your support in the trial process or investigation process? Thank you.
And a question from Takuya.
Hi, could you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thank you for taking my question. And I'm sorry, I was not allowed to get access to Zoom at the beginning, so someone might have asked already, but I know regarding former Prime Minister herself, are you going to ask India about her whereabouts? Because she reportedly, went to India first. So are you going to ask India? And do you think you have to interview with her, or just it's out of scope? Thank you.
Thank you, Takuya. There's a similar question. I'll just share one more question online, is concerning what they say, the trial process of Sheikh Hasina. How will it proceed? And the question, similar to what Takuya is asking, is why is India not handing over to Bangladesh? The interim government says that a formal request has been made to bring her back. Is there any opportunities for the UN to play a role in this matter? Rory?
Thank you for the two questions. I mean, I think kind of relate together to this question of Sheikh Hasina and her extradition. Look, the bottom line is that all those responsible for what happened and what amount to very serious human rights violations and possibly international crimes are held accountable. And the report shows that there are different avenues through which justice can be pursued, both in Bangladesh and internationally. The issue of extradition is really a bilateral process, but we hope that states will cooperate and support each other towards this goal of accountability, whether that's India or other states where people may take refuge. There are other ways that states can cooperate and support Bangladesh as well. For instance, investigating corruption and tracing, assets and ill-gotten or stolen funds. So, the important thing is cooperation first, and secondly, that any extradition or trial process respects due process and international standards of fair trial. The specific point of the death penalty was raised. Yes, for the UN, it is a constraint for us to cooperate in proceedings that can result in the death penalty. But not just for the United Nations. I think for many member states have this concern, and it would be a factor that they would, also have to weigh in relation to their support to the process or the question of extradition. So I think this is really, needs to be seen in this broad principle, really, that accountability must move forward, and states have to find ways to work together to achieve that.
Okay, I think that will draw the press conference to an end here. I see there are some more questions both in the chat room and online. Feel free to reach out to our office. We've got Ravina here and Rory who can assist you if you send us an email. Just also to let you know, the report is online, as is the press release, so you can get information from that. There is also an infographic which you will find, I'm sure, very useful, and we will be sending out broadcast quality video as well. Okay, thank you very much, everyone. Have a pleasant day.